The winter wind howled across the Montana plains as Samuel Brooks stood on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He'd built this ranch with his own two hands, carved out a life from the unforgiving land. But as he looked out at the empty fields, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He was 53 years old, and for the first time in decades, he wondered if all this work, all this solitude, had been worth it. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the wind. A knock, hesitant, almost apologetic. Samuel turned toward his front door, his weathered hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he kept by the entrance. Nobody came out this far unless they were lost or desperate. And desperate people could be dangerous. He opened the door slowly, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman stood there, no more than 22 or 23, her clothes threadbare and covered in dust. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and her eyes, brown and fierce, despite the exhaustion written across her face, met his without flinching. But it wasn't the woman that made Samuel's hand fall away from his rifle. It was the 3 children huddled behind her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The oldest couldn't have been more than 7, a boy with sandy hair and eyes too old for his face. He held the hands of 2 younger girls, twins by the look of them, maybe 4 years old. All 3 children stared at Samuel with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked dangerously close to hope. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," the woman said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "My name is Rebecca Carter. These children need help. We've been walking for 2 days, and your ranch is the first place we've seen for miles." Samuel's eyes narrowed. Something about her hesitation when she mentioned the children nagged at him, but he pushed the thought aside. The temperature was dropping fast, and he could see all 4 of them shivering in the cold. "You better come inside," he said gruffly, stepping back to let them pass. Rebecca didn't move immediately. She looked down at the children, then back at Samuel, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded and ushered the kids through the doorway. As they passed, Samuel noticed their shoes, or what was left of them. The boys' sneakers had holes in both toes, and the girls wore sandals completely inappropriate for Montana in November. Once inside, Rebecca stood awkwardly in the entrance, while the children pressed close to her legs. Samuel could see them more clearly now in the lamplight. They were painfully thin, their clothes hanging loose on small frames. But what struck him most was their silence. Most kids would be crying or complaining after walking for 2 days in the cold. These 3 just watched him with careful, cautious eyes. "Sit down," Samuel said, gesturing toward the couch near the fireplace. "I'll get the fire going properly and make some food." As he moved to stoke the fire, he watched them from the corner of his eye. Rebecca helped the children remove their inadequate jackets and shoes, revealing feet covered in blisters and small cuts. She winced as she looked at them but said nothing. The boy, the oldest, caught Samuel watching and immediately looked away, pulling his sisters closer. "How old are they?" Samuel asked, as he added more wood to the fire. Rebecca's jaw tightened. "The boy is 7. The girls just turned 4 last month, and their parents." The silence that followed was so heavy, Samuel could feel it pressing against his chest. He turned from the fire to look at Rebecca directly. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Their parents are gone," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nobody else." Samuel studied her face, searching for the lie he was certain was there. But all he saw was grief and something that looked like guilt. He'd been alone long enough to recognize pain when he saw it, and this woman was drowning in it. "What about you?" he pressed. "You their aunt? Family friend?" Rebecca shook her head slowly. I was their neighbor. In Billings. Their mother was—" Her voice cracked and she took a deep breath before continuing. "Their mother was my friend. She died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia. She didn't have insurance, couldn't afford the medicine. By the time I scraped together enough money to take her to the hospital, it was too late. The children hadn't moved, but Samuel saw the smallest girl's chin begin to tremble. The boy immediately put his arm around her, whispering something in her ear that Samuel couldn't hear. "And the father?" Samuel asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Never in the picture," Rebecca said flatly. "Sarah, their mother, she never talked about him. I don't think she even knew how to find him if she wanted to." Samuel moved to the kitchen area of his open-plan cabin, pulling out bread and cold cuts from the refrigerator. As he made sandwiches, he continued talking, needing to understand what had brought these people to his door. "So why aren't they with child services? Why bring them out here?" Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Because the system doesn't care about kids like these." Sarah was terrified of them getting separated, put into different homes. "She made me promise." Her voice broke again, and she pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting for control. "She made me promise I'd keep them together, that I'd find them a safe place." Samuel turned back to face her, sandwiches forgotten for a moment. "And you thought that place was a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a man you've never met?" "I didn't know where else to go," Rebecca admitted. The fierce look in her eyes had given way to desperation. "I tried to keep them in Billings. I really did. But I worked 2 jobs just to afford my studio apartment. I can't afford food for 4 people. I can't afford childcare. I got evicted last week because my landlord found out I had the kids staying with me. Said it was against my lease. We've been sleeping in my car, but it broke down about 30 miles from here. We've been walking ever since." She looked down at the children, her expression softening. "I thought maybe out here, away from the city, there might be someone with space. Someone with a heart big enough to help. Your ranch is the first place we've seen that looked like someone actually lived there. All the other properties we passed were abandoned or falling apart." Samuel brought the sandwiches over and set them on the coffee table. The children looked at the food with wide eyes, but didn't move until Rebecca nodded at them. Then they ate with a desperation that made Samuel's chest ache. When was the last time they'd had a proper meal? "What are their names?" he asked quietly. Rebecca looked up at him, surprised. It was the first question he'd asked that sounded like he might actually care, rather than just interrogating her. "The boy is James," she said, gesturing to each child as she spoke. "The twins are Emma and Lily. Sarah named them after her grandmother and mother. She wanted them to have names that meant something, that connected them to family even if that family was gone." James had finished his sandwich and was carefully breaking his second one in half, giving the larger portion to Emma. Samuel watched the gesture, something twisting in his gut. This kid was 7 years old and already taking care of his sisters like a parent. "And what about you?" Samuel asked Rebecca. "What's your plan here? You planning to just drop these kids with the first stranger who opens their door?" Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger. "You think I want to do this? You think this is easy for me? I love these children. Sarah was like a sister to me, but I can't give them what they need. I'm 23 years old, working as a waitress and a gas station clerk, living in my car. What kind of life is that for them? And what makes you think I can give them anything better?" Samuel shot back, his voice harder than he intended. "I'm a rancher. I live alone. I don't know the first thing about raising kids, but you have space," Rebecca said softly. "You have stability. You have land and a home and a life that isn't falling apart. That's more than I can offer them right now." Samuel turned away, running his hand through his graying hair. This was insane. He couldn't take in 3 children. He'd lived alone for almost 20 years, ever since his wife died. He'd built a life of solitude, of routine, of predictability. Children would destroy all of that. But as he looked at them sitting on his couch, their small faces still smudged with dirt from the road, something in him wavered. The girls had fallen asleep against James, who was fighting to keep his own eyes open. Rebecca watched them with such obvious love and pain that Samuel had to look away. "Why don't you all get some rest?" he finally said, his voice gruff. "We can figure out what to do in the morning." Rebecca nodded gratefully. "Thank you. We'll leave first thing. I just needed to get them warm and fed. I'll figure something out." But as Samuel showed them to his spare room, a space that hadn't been used in years. He knew that come morning he wouldn't be able to simply send them away. Not into the cold, not back to a broken-down car and an uncertain future. He just didn't know yet if he was brave enough to offer them what they really needed: a home. As he lay in his own bed that night, listening to the old house settle around him, Samuel stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell he was supposed to do. He'd spent 2 decades building walls around his heart, keeping the world at arm's length. He'd told himself it was easier this way, safer, simpler. But tonight, with 3 children and a desperate young woman sleeping down the hall, those walls felt thinner than they'd ever been. And Samuel Brooks, the lonely rancher who'd convinced himself he didn't need anyone, felt the first crack forming in the armor he'd worn for so long. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 40 years. His internal clock didn't care about unexpected guests or life-changing decisions. He dressed quietly in the darkness, pulling on his worn jeans and flannel shirt, and made his way to the kitchen to start the coffee. The house was silent except for the familiar creaks and groans of old wood. For a moment, Samuel wondered if last night had been some kind of fever dream, if he'd imagined the knock at the door, the desperate young woman, the 3 silent children with their haunted eyes. Then he heard it, a soft padding of small feet on the hardwood floor. Samuel turned to find James standing in the hallway, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. The boy froze when he saw Samuel, his body tensing like a deer ready to bolt. "Morning," Samuel said quietly, keeping his voice neutral. He'd handled plenty of skittish animals in his time. He figured kids couldn't be that different. "You hungry?" James didn't respond immediately. His eyes darted toward the front door, then back to Samuel, calculating. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Can you cook?" Samuel asked. The question seemed to surprise the boy. He nodded again, more confidently this time. "Good. Then you can help me make breakfast for everyone. Your sisters like eggs?" "Yes, sir," James said softly. It was the first time Samuel had heard him speak. His voice was quiet but clear, with the careful pronunciation of a child who'd been taught to mind his manners. Samuel pulled eggs, bacon, and bread from the refrigerator and set them on the counter. James approached slowly, watching Samuel's every movement. When Samuel handed him a bowl and pointed to the eggs, the boy took them without hesitation and began cracking them with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," Samuel observed. "I helped Mom," James said simply, his eyes focused on the task. "She worked nights sometimes, so I learned to make breakfast for Emma and Lily." 7 years old, Samuel thought, and already carrying the weight of the world. He turned to the stove, laying strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The sizzle and smell of cooking meat filled the kitchen. "Your mom taught you well," Samuel said after a moment. "These eggs are cracked clean, no shells." James's shoulders relaxed slightly at the praise, though he didn't smile. Samuel recognized the look. It was the same expression he'd seen on young ranch hands who'd grown up too fast, who'd learned early that life didn't give you much room for mistakes. By the time Rebecca emerged from the spare room, carrying a sleepy twin on each hip, the kitchen table was set with plates of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight. "James, did you—" she started. "Mr. Brooks needed help," James interrupted, finally allowing himself a small smile. "I'm a good helper." "Yes, you are," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. She set the twins down in chairs and helped them scoot closer to the table. Emma and Lily were more animated this morning, their eyes bright as they looked at the food. Samuel poured coffee for Rebecca and milk for the children, then took his seat at the head of the table. It felt strange, having people in his kitchen after so many years of eating alone. The clatter of forks on plates, the soft murmur of Rebecca encouraging the girls to eat their vegetables. The way James carefully cut his sister's bacon into small pieces, it was overwhelming in a way he hadn't expected. "This is really kind of you," Rebecca said between bites. "We'll clean up and be out of your hair as soon as we're done." I called the auto shop in town last night from your phone. I hope that's okay. They said they might be able to tow my car, but it'll cost more than I have right now. Samuel grunted noncommittally, focusing on his eggs. He'd been thinking all night about what Rebecca had said, about the system not caring for kids like these. He'd seen enough in his 53 years to know she was probably right. These children would get swallowed up by bureaucracy, separated, lost in a shuffle of paperwork and overburdened caseworkers. But what was the alternative? He was a bachelor rancher with no experience raising children. He didn't know about schools or doctors or whatever else kids needed. His life was cattle and fences and the endless work of maintaining a ranch that barely broke even most years. Rebecca, he said finally, setting down his fork. What happens to them if you take them back to Billings? She looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with a sadness that made her look older than her years. Honestly, I don't know. I'd tried to keep them with me, but without a place to live or money for childcare. I'd probably have to call social services. They'd go into the system, and Sarah's worst fear would come true. They'd be split up. Why would they split them up? Samuel asked. Because it's hard to find foster homes willing to take 3 kids at once, Rebecca explained. Especially when one's school-aged and 2 are toddlers. It's easier for the system to place them separately. A family might take James, another might take one of the twins, someone else might take the other. They tell you it's temporary, that they'll try to keep siblings together, but she trailed off, shaking her head. James had stopped eating, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. His face had gone pale, and his eyes were fixed on Rebecca with an intensity that made Samuel's chest tighten. "We won't get split up," James said, his voice suddenly fierce. "I won't let them take Emma and Lily away from me. I promise, Mom." "Sweetheart, sometimes promises are hard to keep," Rebecca said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "No," James insisted, pulling his hand back. His jaw was set in a stubborn line that reminded Samuel of himself. "I'm supposed to take care of them. Mom said I was the big brother, and that meant I had to protect them. I can't protect them if we're not together." Emma and Lily had stopped eating too, sensing the tension. Lily's lower lip began to tremble, and Emma reached for her twin's hand under the table. Samuel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "James, come with me. I need help with morning chores." Rebecca looked startled. "He doesn't need to. The boy needs to learn how things work around here if he's going to be useful," Samuel interrupted, his voice gruff. "Come on, son." James hesitated, looking at his sisters, then at Rebecca. When she nodded, he slid out of his chair and followed Samuel to the mudroom. Samuel handed him a jacket. It was far too big, but it would do, and a pair of boots outside. The Montana morning was crisp and clear, the kind of cold that stung your lungs and made your breath visible in the air. Samuel led James toward the barn, their footsteps crunching on frost-covered grass. "You know anything about cattle?" Samuel asked. "No, sir," James admitted. "Then you're about to learn." The barn was warm compared to the outside air, heated by the body warmth of the dozen cattle that Samuel kept close during winter. The smell of hay and animals filled the space, and James wrinkled his nose. "You get used to it," Samuel said. "Here, help me carry these hay bales." For the next hour, Samuel put James to work. He showed him how to feed the cattle, how to check their water troughs, how to look for signs of illness or injury. The boy was small for his age, probably from not eating enough, but he was determined. He struggled with the weight of the hay bales, but refused to complain or ask for help. As they worked, Samuel talked, not about the situation with the children or what would happen next, but about the ranch. He told James about the land, about the patterns of the seasons, about how everything on a ranch was connected. The health of the cattle depended on the quality of the grass, which depended on the rain and the soil, which depended on how well you manage the land. "A ranch is like a promise," Samuel said, as they finished filling the last water trough. "You promise to take care of the land and the animals, and in return, they take care of you. But it only works if you keep your word, if you're consistent. If you show up every single day, no matter how you feel or what else is happening." James looked up at him, his young face serious. Like how I promised to take care of Emma and Lily? Samuel felt something twist in his chest. He'd been trying to avoid this conversation, but the boy had brought them right back to it, with the directness that only children could manage. Yeah, Samuel said quietly. Like that. They stood in the barn for a moment, the only sound the gentle lowing of the cattle and the rustle of hay as the animals ate. Finally, James spoke again. Are you going to make us leave? The question hung in the cold air between them. Samuel looked down at this 7-year-old boy who'd already seen too much loss, who'd taken on responsibilities no child should have to carry. He thought about the twins inside, about Rebecca's desperate search for somewhere safe, about the promise a dying mother had extracted from her friend. He thought about his own life, the solitude he'd chosen, the walls he'd built, the decades of telling himself he was better off alone. He thought about his wife, Marie, who died 20 years ago from cancer. They'd planned to have children, but the disease had come too fast, too aggressive. After she was gone, Samuel had convinced himself he didn't want that life anymore. It was easier to be alone than to risk that kind of pain again. But looking at James now, at this brave, scared, determined little boy, Samuel realized that maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe safety wasn't the same thing as living. I'm going to make you a deal, Samuel said finally. You and your sisters can stay here for a while. Not forever, I'm not promising that. But long enough for Rebecca to figure things out, to find a better solution. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. But there are rules. James's eyes widened with hope so bright it was almost painful to see. What rules? 1. You do what I tell you when I tell you. This is a working ranch, and if you're here, you work. Age-appropriate stuff, but you pull your weight. James nodded eagerly. I can do that. 2. You go to school. The elementary school in town is about 15 miles away. We'll figure out transportation. Okay, James agreed. 3. You tell me the truth, always. I don't care what happened or what you did. You tell me the truth, and we'll deal with it together. But if you lie to me, that's it. Deal's off, I promise, James said solemnly. I don't lie. Mom said lying was for cowards. Samuel felt a pang of sympathy for the woman he'd never met, the one who'd raised this remarkable child in circumstances he could only imagine. Your mom sounds like she was a smart lady. She was the best, James said quietly. Even when she was sick, she still made sure we were okay. She worked so hard. I'm sure she did, Samuel said. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion welling up in his chest. Come on, let's head back inside. It's cold out here, and you need better clothes if you're going to be doing ranch work. As they walked back to the house, James slipped his small hand into Samuel's larger, calloused one. The gesture was so unexpected, so trusting, that Samuel nearly stopped walking. He looked down at the boy, at the hope and fear mixed in his expression, and felt those carefully constructed walls around his heart crack a little bit more. Inside, Rebecca was cleaning up the breakfast dishes, while the twins played quietly on the living room floor with some wooden blocks Samuel vaguely remembered having in a closet somewhere. When she saw James holding Samuel's hand, her eyes widened in surprise. We need to talk, Samuel said to Rebecca. She dried her hands on a dish towel, her expression wary. Okay. Samuel sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for her to do the same. James immediately went to his sisters, sitting down with them and starting to build a tower with the blocks. Here's what I'm thinking, Samuel began, keeping his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. They can stay here, temporarily, while you get back on your feet and figure out a permanent solution. Rebecca's mouth fell open. Are you serious? I don't joke about things like this, Samuel said, but I need you to understand I'm not equipped for this. I don't know how to be a parent or a guardian or whatever you want to call it. I'm offering a safe place to stay and 3 meals a day. That's what I can give them right now. That's more than enough, Rebecca said, her eyes filling with tears. That's everything. What about you? Samuel asked. What's your plan? Rebecca wiped her eyes quickly. I'll go back to Billings, get my jobs back, save up money. Maybe I can find a better apartment, somewhere that allows children. It might take a few months, but I'll figure it out. And I'll visit whenever I can, if that's okay with you. Samuel nodded slowly. They need stability, consistency. If you're going to be in their lives, you need to actually be in their lives, not just promises of visits that might not happen. I understand, Rebecca said. I love those kids. I won't disappear on them. Good. Samuel stood up, feeling the weight of the decision he'd just made settling onto his shoulders. Then we should probably talk about the practical stuff. Schools, doctors' clothes. I assume they don't have much. Just what they're wearing, Rebecca admitted. Everything else was in my apartment when I got evicted. The landlord changed the locks before I could get back. Samuel sighed. Of course, nothing about this situation was simple. All right. I'll take you all into town this afternoon. We'll get them set up with what they need. As Rebecca thanked him profusely, Samuel walked over to where the children were playing. Emma looked up at him with wide blue eyes, so much like her brothers, and smiled. It was the first time he'd seen any of them smile, and it transformed her face from scared and wary to simply beautiful. Mr. Brooks is going to let us stay, James told his sisters excitedly. We don't have to be separated. Lily jumped up and wrapped her small arms around Samuel's leg, hugging him tightly. Emma followed suit, and suddenly Samuel found himself standing in his living room with two 4-year-old girls clinging to him like he was the answer to all their prayers. Maybe he was. Or maybe he was just a lonely old rancher who'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. Either way, there was no going back now. Samuel Brooks had opened his door to 3 nameless children and a desperate young woman. And in doing so, he'd opened something else, a door to his own heart that he'd thought was sealed shut forever. The ranch that had been his sanctuary of solitude was about to become something entirely different. And as James grinned up at him and the twins giggled against his legs, Samuel realized that maybe, just maybe, different didn't have to mean worse. It might actually mean better. The drive into town was Samuel's first real test of his decision. His truck was a working vehicle, bench seats, no backseat belts, and a heater that worked when it felt like it. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat with Lily on her lap, while James squeezed in between them holding Emma. This isn't exactly safe, Rebecca said nervously as Samuel navigated the dirt road that led from his ranch to the highway. Nothing about this situation is exactly safe, Samuel replied, but we'll fix it. Add a car seat to the list of things we need to buy. The list had grown considerably in the 2 hours since breakfast. Clothes, shoes, school supplies, toiletries, winter coats, and now car seats. Samuel did mental math, calculating how much this was going to cost against his modest savings. The ranch made enough to keep him fed and the bills paid, but there wasn't much left over for extras. This definitely qualified as extra. Pine Ridge was the kind of small Montana town where everyone knew everyone else's business, usually before you knew it yourself. The main street consisted of a hardware store, a diner, a gas station, a general store that tried to be everything to everyone, and a bar that had been there since before Samuel was born. Population, 847, according to the faded sign at the town limit. Samuel parked in front of Morrison's general store, and the moment he stepped out with 3 children in tow, he could feel the eyes on them. Mrs. Morrison herself was standing at the window, her face pressed against the glass like a kid at a candy store. This is going to be interesting, Samuel muttered. Is this a small-town thing? Rebecca asked, noticing the stares. It's a Samuel Brooks has lived alone for 20 years and suddenly shows up with 3 kids thing, Samuel replied. Brace yourself. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Mrs. Morrison practically sprinted from behind the counter. She was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Samuel Brooks, she said, her gaze sweeping over the children with undisguised curiosity. I didn't know you had grandchildren visiting. I don't, Samuel said flatly. These children are staying with me for a while. They need clothes, winter gear, and school supplies. Mrs. Morrison's eyes widened, but to her credit, she didn't push for more information. Yet. Well, let's get them measured up. How old are they? 7 and 4, Rebecca supplied when Samuel looked uncertain. For the next hour, Mrs. Morrison transformed into a woman on a mission. She pulled out jeans and shirts, winter coats and boots, measuring the children and making recommendations. James stood stoically through the process, but the twins seemed overwhelmed by the attention, clinging to Rebecca's legs. "These girls are identical," Mrs. Morrison observed as she measured them. "Do you dress them the same or different?" Samuel looked at Rebecca, who looked at the girls. I don't know," he admitted. Emma, who'd been quiet throughout the shopping trip, suddenly spoke up. "Different," she said firmly. "I'm Emma, not Lily. We're not the same person." Mrs. Morrison laughed. "Smart girl. Different it is." She pulled out a purple coat for Emma and a pink one for Lily. "How's this?" Emma's face lit up in a way that made Samuel's throat tight. "I love purple," she whispered. "Then purple it is," Mrs. Morrison said warmly. She looked at Samuel. "You're going to need at least 5 outfits each for the week, plus extras. Winter here is brutal, so multiple layers. And these kids are too skinny. You're going to need to feed them up, Samuel. They'll grow fast." As the pile of clothes grew, so did the total on Mrs. Morrison's register. Samuel watched the numbers climb and felt sweat forming on his brow despite the cool air. When she finally announced the total, he had to grip the counter to steady himself. "That's just for the clothes and coats," Mrs. Morrison said gently, noticing his reaction. "You still need school supplies and car seats." Samuel pulled out his wallet and handed over his credit card, hoping it wouldn't be declined. As Mrs. Morrison processed the payment, she leaned in close. "Whatever you're doing, Samuel, it's a good thing," she said quietly. "These kids look like they've had a rough time. They're lucky to have found you." Samuel didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and gathered the bags. As they loaded everything into the truck, James tugged on his sleeve. "Mr. Brooks, how much did all that cost?" Samuel looked down at the boy, seeing worry etched on his young face. "Don't worry about it, but I should help pay for it," James insisted. "It's not fair that you spend all your money on us." "You'll work it off," Samuel said. "Remember Rule 1? You pull your weight. There's plenty to do on the ranch." James seemed to accept this, his shoulders relaxing slightly. They made one more stop at the hardware store for car seats. Samuel had to ask the clerk which ones were appropriate for what ages, and then headed to the elementary school. Pine Ridge Elementary was a small brick building that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and hadn't been updated much since. The principal, Margaret Chen, was a brisk woman in her 40s who listened to Samuel's abbreviated explanation with a neutral expression. "So you're enrolling James Carter as a temporary guardian?" she asked, her pen poised over the enrollment forms. "That's right," Samuel confirmed, "and the twins will be enrolling in pre-K when?" Samuel looked at Rebecca, who shrugged. He hadn't even thought about the twins needing school. "I guess next semester?" Principal Chen smiled slightly. "They're 4, Mr. Brooks. They don't have to be in school yet, but we do have a pre-K program if you're interested. It's only 3 days a week, and it would help socialize them." Samuel felt overwhelmed by how many decisions needed to be made. School, clothes, food, health care. It was endless. "Let me think about it," he said. "Of course." Principal Chen turned her attention to James, who'd been sitting quietly in the chair beside Samuel. "James, how do you feel about starting school here?" James glanced at Samuel before answering. "I like school. I'm good at reading. That's wonderful. What grade were you in at your last school?" "2nd grade. But I missed a lot because—" He trailed off, his face clouding over, "because things were difficult at home." Rebecca finished gently. "His mother was ill for several months before she passed. James stayed home to help take care of his sisters." Principal Chen's expression softened. "I understand. We'll make sure James gets any support he needs to catch up. Mr. Brooks, I'll need you to fill out these emergency contact forms and provide proof of guardianship." "I don't have legal guardianship," Samuel admitted. "This is a temporary arrangement while Rebecca here gets back on her feet." Principal Chen set down her pen and looked at him seriously. "Mr. Brooks, I need to be frank with you. Without legal guardianship, I can't enroll James. You'll need to file paperwork with family court to become his temporary guardian. Same goes for medical care. Hospitals won't treat the children without proper authorization." Samuel felt a wave of frustration wash over him. Of course it couldn't be simple. How long does that take? With a good lawyer, maybe a few weeks. Without one, Principal Chen shrugged. Could be months. The courts are backlogged. I can't afford a lawyer, Samuel said bluntly. There are legal aid services in Billings, Principal Chen offered. They help with cases like this. In the meantime, James can attend school. I'll make an exception given the circumstances, but you need to get that paperwork filed as soon as possible. The drive back to the ranch was quieter than the drive into town. Samuel's mind was spinning with everything he needed to do, everything he didn't know how to do. Legal guardianship, court filings, lawyers. This was so far outside his world of cattle and fence posts that he felt like he was drowning. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly as they pulled onto the ranch road. "I didn't think about all the legal stuff. I just thought you'd find someone to take them in and everything would work out," Samuel finished. "Life doesn't work that way." "I know," Rebecca whispered. "I'm sorry." Samuel sighed, his anger deflating. "It's not your fault. We'll figure it out. I'll call legal aid tomorrow." Back at the ranch, Samuel helped carry the bags inside while the children explored their new clothes with wide eyes. Emma held her purple coat like it was made of gold, and Lily kept running her fingers over the soft fabric of her pink one. "Can we really keep all of this?" Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Yes," Samuel said. "It's yours." The twins looked at each other, then launched themselves at Samuel, hugging his legs again. He was starting to expect these attacks of affection, though they still caught him off guard. As evening approached, Samuel realized another thing he hadn't thought through. Dinner. He was used to making simple meals for himself, meat, potatoes, maybe some canned vegetables. "What did kids eat?" "Do you know how to cook?" he asked Rebecca. She laughed. Basic stuff. Why?" "Because I'm realizing I have no idea what to feed children." "They're not that different from adults," Rebecca said. "Just smaller portions and maybe avoid anything too spicy." Together, they managed to make spaghetti with meat sauce and a salad. James helped set the table, and the twins washed their hands without being asked, a small sign of the training their mother had instilled in them. Dinner was chaotic in a way Samuel wasn't used to. Emma spilled her milk, and Lily got sauce on her new shirt. James tried to help clean up both messes while eating his own dinner, and Rebecca refereed the chaos with practiced ease. Samuel found himself watching them, this makeshift family that had invaded his quiet life. 2 days ago, his biggest concern had been a broken fence in the north pasture. Now he was worried about legal guardianship and whether he had enough milk for 3 children. After dinner, Rebecca announced she needed to leave in the morning. "I have to get back to Billings, see if I can get my jobs back. The longer I'm away, the harder it'll be." The news hit the children like a physical blow. Emma and Lily immediately started crying, and even James looked stricken. "But you just got here," James protested. "You can't leave us." "I'm not leaving you," Rebecca said, kneeling down to their level. "I'm going to work so I can help Mr. Brooks take care of you. And I'll visit as much as I can, I promise." "That's what Mom said," James said, his voice bitter. "She promised she'd get better, but she didn't." Rebecca pulled him into a hug, and he finally broke down, sobbing into her shoulder. The twins joined in, and soon all 3 children were crying. Rebecca held them close, tears streaming down her own face. Samuel stood awkwardly nearby, unsure what to do. He wasn't good at emotional situations. He'd spent 20 years avoiding them. But as he watched these children grieve for their mother, for their lost stability, for yet another person leaving them, he felt something crack inside his chest. He walked over and sat down on the floor beside them, his old knees protesting. James looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," Samuel said gruffly. "I live here. This is my home. And as long as you need a place to stay, you have one. Promise?" James asked, his voice breaking on the word. Samuel thought about all the promises that had been broken in these children's short lives. He thought about the weight of the commitment he was making, and he thought about the alternative, sending them back into uncertainty, into a system that would tear them apart. "I promise," Samuel said. "I'll keep you together and I'll keep you safe." That's what ranchers do. We keep our promises. James nodded slowly, then did something that surprised Samuel. He crawled over and sat in Samuel's lap, still crying but seeking comfort from this rough, uncertain man who'd opened his door to them. Emma and Lily followed, and suddenly Samuel had 3 grieving children piled onto him, their small bodies shaking with sobs. He looked at Rebecca helplessly, and she gave him an encouraging nod. Slowly, awkwardly, Samuel put his arms around them. He didn't say anything. He didn't have words for this moment. But he held them while they cried, providing the only thing he knew how to give: presence and stability. Later, after the children had cried themselves out and Rebecca had put them to bed, Samuel stood on his porch, looking out at the darkening sky. Rebecca joined him, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." "I know this isn't what you signed up for." "I didn't sign up for anything," Samuel replied. "You knocked on my door and turned my life upside down." "I know, and I'm sorry." Samuel was quiet for a long moment.
Don't be!
"Those kids, they deserve better than what they've gotten. If I can give them that, even for a little while, then maybe all this solitude I've been living in has been worth something." Rebecca smiled. "You're a good man, Samuel Brooks." "I'm a man who's in over his head," Samuel corrected. "But I guess we'll figure it out." As Rebecca went back inside to pack for her trip back to Billings, Samuel stayed on the porch. He thought about the day, the shopping trip, the school visit, the legal complications, the tearful evening. 24 hours ago, he'd been alone. Now he was responsible for 3 children who needed everything. He wasn't sure he knew how to give. But as he looked through the window at James helping Rebecca fold laundry, at the twins playing with their new toys on the floor, Samuel realized something. For the first time in 20 years, his house felt like a home, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth all the chaos and uncertainty that came with it. The foundation was shaky, held together with promises and hope, and the determination of a 7-year-old boy who refused to be separated from his sisters. But it was a foundation nonetheless, and Samuel Brooks, the lonely rancher who'd spent 2 decades building walls, was going to do everything in his power to make sure it held. Rebecca left before sunrise, slipping out quietly to avoid another tearful goodbye. Samuel found her note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for giving them a chance. I'll call tonight." He crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash, then started the coffee maker. The house felt different now, fuller somehow, even though Rebecca had only been one person. Or maybe it was just the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical thing. James appeared in the doorway at 6:30, already dressed in his new jeans and a flannel shirt that was still too big for him. "She's gone, isn't she?" "Yeah," Samuel said, seeing no point in sugarcoating it. "She left early." James nodded, his face carefully neutral. "The twins are going to be upset." "Probably," Samuel agreed. "You want to wake them up, or should I?" "I'll do it," James said. "They're used to me." Samuel watched the boy walk back down the hall with the posture of someone carrying a burden twice his size. 7 years old, and already he understood that someone had to be strong for the little ones. The morning routine was awkward without Rebecca as a buffer. Emma cried for 20 minutes when she realized Rebecca was gone, and Lily refused to eat her breakfast. James tried to comfort his sisters while eating his own food, his eyes darting between them and Samuel as if trying to figure out who needed him more. "All right." "That's enough," Samuel finally said, his voice firmer than he intended. All 3 children froze, looking at him with wide eyes. He softened his tone slightly. "Rebecca had to go to work. That's what adults do. They work to earn money. She'll call tonight. In the meantime, we have our own work to do." "What work?" Emma asked, her tears stopping as curiosity took over. "Ranch work," Samuel said. "If you're going to live here, you need to understand how this place operates. Get your coats on." The morning air was sharp and cold, frost still clinging to the grass, even though the sun was rising. Samuel led the children to the chicken coop, a structure he'd built 5 years ago and had been meaning to expand. "These are chickens," he said. stating the obvious as 6 hens clucked and pecked at the ground. They give us eggs. Every morning, someone needs to collect the eggs, give them fresh water and scatter feed. That's going to be your job, James. James looked at the chickens nervously. Will they bite me? Peck, not bite. And only if you bother them. Move slowly, talk soft, and they'll leave you alone. Samuel demonstrated, reaching under a hen to pull out a warm brown egg. See? Easy. James approached cautiously, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for an egg. The hen squawked and shifted, and James jerked his hand back. She's just settling, Samuel said. Try again. It took 3 more attempts, but James finally retrieved an egg, his face breaking into a proud smile. I did it. Good. Now get the rest while I show the girls something else. Samuel led the twins to the barn, where he kept 2 horses. Thunder, a grey gelding he'd had for 15 years, and Daisy, a gentler mare he'd bought at auction 3 years back when Thunder started showing his age. This is Daisy, Samuel said, letting the horse sniff his hand. Emma, Lily, come here. The twins approached hesitantly, staying close together. Lily hid partially behind her sister. Hold out your hand flat like this, Samuel demonstrated. Let her smell you. Emma extended her hand, trembling slightly. Daisy's soft nose brushed against her palm, and Emma gasped. She's so soft. Can I try? Lily asked, her shyness momentarily forgotten. For the next hour, Samuel let the girls brush Daisy's coat while he cleaned out the stalls. He explained everything as he worked. Why horses needed their hooves picked, how to tell if an animal was healthy, why the barn needed to be kept clean. James joined them after finishing with the chickens. 7 eggs carefully cradled in his shirt. I only broke 1, he announced proudly. That's better than I did my first time, Samuel lied. The boy needed the confidence. They worked until mid-morning, and Samuel was surprised by how much the children could do when given clear instructions. James followed directions precisely. Emma asked 100 questions about everything, and Lily worked quietly but diligently at whatever task she was given. When they returned to the house, all 3 children were flushed with cold and accomplishment. Samuel made them hot chocolate, something he hadn't made in decades, and they sat around the kitchen table while he scrambled the fresh eggs for a late breakfast. Mr. Brooks, James asked, cupping his hands around the warm mug. When do I start school? Monday, Samuel said. The principal had called the day before, with confirmation that James could attend while they sorted out the legal paperwork. That gives us 3 days to get you ready. What about us? Emma asked. You and Lily will stay here with me, Samuel said. At least until we figure out the pre-K situation. What's pre-K? Lily asked. School for little kids, James explained. It's fun. You learn letters and numbers and get to play with other kids. The twins exchanged glances. We don't know other kids, Emma said quietly. Just James. The statement hit Samuel harder than it should have. These children had been so isolated, first by poverty and then by their mother's illness. They'd spent their whole lives in survival mode, with no time for the normal childhood experiences of friends and play dates and birthday parties. Well, that'll change, Samuel said gruffly. But first, we need to establish some rules around here. Over lunch, Samuel laid out his expectations. Bedtime at 8:30 on school nights, 9 on weekends. Homework done before TV, not that he watched much television anyway. Chores every morning and evening. Respect for the animals and the property. And honesty, always honesty. What happens if we break the rules? James asked, his body tense. Samuel recognized the question for what it was. A child who'd learned to fear punishment. Trying to figure out how bad things would get. Depends on the rule and why you broke it, Samuel said. Accidents happen. Mistakes happen. We talk about it, figure out how to fix it and move on. But deliberate disobedience or lying. He paused, making sure he had all 3 children's attention. That's different. That breaks trust. And without trust, nothing works. Mom used to give us timeouts, Emma offered. 5 minutes in the corner. That seems reasonable, Samuel said. Though privately, he had no idea if that was the right way to discipline children. He'd have to figure it out as he went. That afternoon, Samuel called the legal aid office in Billings. after being transferred 3 times and waiting on hold for 20 minutes. He finally reached a lawyer named Patricia Hoffman. "So let me make sure I understand," Patricia said, after Samuel explained the situation. "You have 3 children living with you. You're not related to them. You don't have legal guardianship. And their only living connection is a 23-year-old woman who has no stable housing or income." "That about sums it up," Samuel said. "Mr. Brooks, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a complicated situation. The state could argue that these children should be in foster care while proper guardianship is established. If Child Protective Services gets involved, they stay together," Samuel interrupted. "That's non-negotiable." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I admire your conviction, but you need to understand the reality. The court's primary concern is the welfare of the children. They'll want to know why you, a single man with no parenting experience, are a better option than trained foster parents." "Because I'm willing to keep them together," Samuel said. "Because they've already lost everything, and I'm offering them stability. Because sometimes the best option isn't the one that looks good on paper. It's the one that actually gives a damn." He heard Patricia sigh. "All right, I'll take your case, but we need to do this right. I'll need character references, a home study, background checks. The works. And Mr. Brooks, this is going to take time. Months, probably." "How many months?" "If everything goes smoothly, 3 to 6. If there are complications, could be longer." Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, you keep doing what you're doing. Be a good guardian. Document everything. Keep the children safe, healthy, and happy. And pray that CPS doesn't show up at your door before we get the paperwork filed." After hanging up, Samuel sat at his kitchen table and put his head in his hands. What had he gotten himself into? He was 53 years old, set in his ways, comfortable in his solitude. And now he was fighting the legal system to keep 3 children he'd known for less than a week. But when he looked up and saw James through the window, teaching his sisters how to toss feed to the chickens, he knew he couldn't back out. These kids had been dealt a bad hand, and for whatever reason, fate had brought them to his door. He was going to see this through. The first weekend passed in a blur of activity. Samuel taught James how to mend a fence, showed the twins how to collect kindling for the fireplace, and discovered that Emma had a remarkable talent for spotting things that were broken or out of place. She'd point out a loose board, a gate that wasn't latching properly, or a water trough that was leaking, and Samuel would find himself wondering how he'd missed these things. "You've got a good eye," he told her on Sunday afternoon, as she pointed out a crack in one of the barn windows. Emma beamed. "Mom said I was observant. That means I notice stuff." "Your mom was right," Samuel said. "That's a valuable skill." Sunday evening, Rebecca called. Samuel handed the phone to James and listened as the boy's voice went from excited to sad to resigned in the span of 5 minutes. "She got her jobs back," James reported after hanging up. "She's staying with a friend until she can afford her own place. She said she'll visit in 2 weeks. "That's good," Samuel said, though he could see the disappointment on James's face. 2 weeks probably felt like forever to a 7-year-old. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Samuel found James sitting on the back porch despite the cold. The boy was wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the dark expanse of the ranch. Samuel grabbed his own jacket and joined him. "Can't sleep?" "I'm scared," James admitted quietly. "What if they take us away? What if we get split up?" "That's not going to happen," Samuel said, though he couldn't make that promise with complete certainty. "You don't know that," James said, and there was an adult weariness in his voice that made Samuel's chest ache. "Bad things happen all the time. Mom got sick even though she did everything right. We lost our apartment even though we tried so hard to stay. Why would this be different?" Samuel didn't have a good answer for that. He'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes, despite your best efforts, things fell apart anyway. But he also knew that giving up guaranteed failure. "You're right," he said finally. "I can't promise nothing bad will happen. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that I'll fight for you and your sisters. I'll do everything in my power to keep you together and keep you safe. Sometimes that's all you can do, show up and fight, even when you're scared. James was quiet for a long moment. Were you scared when your wife died? The question caught Samuel off guard. He hadn't talked about Marie in years, had trained himself to keep that pain locked away where it couldn't touch him. Terrified, he admitted. She was everything to me. When she got sick, I felt helpless. And after she died, I was so scared of feeling that pain again that I just stopped letting people in. Stopped trying to build a life that included anyone but me. Is that why you live alone? James asked. Yeah, Samuel said. I thought it was easier, safer. Was it? Samuel looked at this wise, wounded 7-year-old and shook his head. No, it was just lonelier. James leaned against Samuel's side, a small gesture of trust that felt monumental. I'm glad Rebecca knocked on your door. Me too, kid, Samuel said, putting his arm around the boy's thin shoulders. Me too. Monday morning arrived with the chaos of the first day of school. James was up early, nervous and excited in equal measure. Samuel drove him to Pine Ridge Elementary in the truck, now equipped with the newly installed car seats in case of emergencies. What if the other kids don't like me? James asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Then they're idiots, Samuel said bluntly. You're a good kid, James. Smart, hard-working, responsible. Any kid would be lucky to have you as a friend. James smiled at that, some of his anxiety easing. Will you pick me up after school? I'll be right here at 3 o'clock, Samuel promised. You can count on it. He watched James walk into the building, his new backpack looking enormous on his small frame. The boy turned at the door and waved, and Samuel waved back, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. When had these children become so important to him? It had been less than a week, but already he couldn't imagine his house without their noise and chaos and endless questions. He drove back to the ranch where Emma and Lily were waiting, with a list of questions about where James had gone and when he'd be back. Samuel distracted them with chores, and then, on impulse, drove them into town to the small library. The librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy Pierce, lit up when she saw the twins. Well, who do we have here? Emma and Lily, Samuel said. They're staying with me. I thought they might like some books. Dorothy's eyes sparkled with barely contained curiosity, but she focused on the girls. Do you like stories? Both twins nodded eagerly, and for the next hour, Dorothy read to them, while Samuel browsed the parenting section, feeling completely out of his depth as he looked at titles like The Whole Brain Child and How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. He checked out 3 books that seemed the least complicated and a stack of picture books for the twins. As they left, Dorothy called out, Samuel Brooks, you come back any time. It's good to see you with children. Brings life to those old eyes of yours. That afternoon, Samuel picked up James from school and listened to him chatter about his teacher. Mrs. Patterson and the boy who'd shared his crayons at art time, and the girl who'd invited him to play kickball at recess. So it was a good day. Samuel asked as they drove home. The best day, James said. Thank you for letting me go to school, Mr. Brooks. Samuel glanced at the boy, seeing the joy on his face, and felt something shift inside his chest. These children were healing, slowly, painfully, but they were healing. And somehow, without meaning to, they were healing him too. The lonely rancher who'd spent 20 years building walls was finally learning to tear them down. And while it terrified him, it also felt like waking up after a very long sleep. The foundation they'd built in that first week was stronger now. Still uncertain, still fragile in places, but growing more solid with each day that passed. And Samuel Brooks was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. 3 weeks into their new life. Samuel received a phone call that made his blood run cold. Mr. Brooks? This is Jennifer Martinez from Montana Child Protective Services. I'm calling regarding the 3 minors currently residing in your home. Samuel's hand tightened around the phone. How did you know about them? We received a report, Jennifer said, her tone professionally neutral. I'll need to schedule a home visit to assess the living situation. Would Thursday at 10 work for you? Thursday was 2 days away. 2 days to prepare for someone who could tear his makeshift family apart with the stroke of a pen. Thursday's fine, Samuel said. his voice steadier than he felt. After hanging up, he immediately called Patricia Hoffman. CPS knows. They're coming Thursday, Patricia swore softly. I was hoping we'd have more time. The guardianship paperwork isn't filed yet. We're still waiting on your background check results. Mr. Brooks, you need to understand that if this caseworker determines the children are at risk or that your home is unsuitable, they can remove them immediately. Then what do I do? Be honest. Show them the children are safe, healthy, and happy. Have the house clean but not suspiciously perfect. Let them interview the kids and pray that we get lucky. Samuel spent the next 2 days in a state of controlled panic. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, made sure the children's rooms were organized, and coached them on what to expect without trying to script their answers. A woman from the state is coming to visit, he explained Wednesday evening after dinner. She's going to ask you questions about living here. Just tell her the truth, okay? What kind of questions? James asked, immediately wary. About whether you feel safe, whether you have enough food, whether I'm treating you well. Regular stuff. Emma looked worried. Are they going to take us away? Not if I can help it, Samuel said. But you need to be honest with her. If something's wrong, you need to tell her. And if everything's okay, you tell her that too. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the Montana weather was trying to be cooperative. Samuel had the children dressed in their good clothes and fed by 9:30. By 9:45, he was pacing the living room while James read to his sisters to distract them. Jennifer Martinez arrived exactly at 10 in a state vehicle. She was younger than Samuel expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Brooks, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. Samuel shook her hand, noting the firm grip. Not like I had much choice. No, I suppose not. Jennifer smiled slightly. May I come in? For the next hour, Jennifer toured the house, taking notes on her tablet. She examined the children's bedroom, looked in the refrigerator, checked the bathroom for basic supplies. She asked about smoke detectors, locks on doors, and whether Samuel kept any firearms in the house. I have a hunting rifle and a shotgun, Samuel admitted. Both locked in a gun safe in my bedroom, ammunition stored separately. Jennifer nodded, making notes. Good. Can I speak with the children? Samuel called them in, his heart pounding. James entered with his sisters flanking him, all three wearing identical expressions of careful neutrality. Hi there, Jennifer said warmly, kneeling down to their level. I'm Ms. Martinez. I just want to ask you a few questions, okay? There are no wrong answers. I just want to know how you're doing. She started with the twins, asking gentle questions about what they did all day, whether they liked living on the ranch, if they missed anything from their old home. Emma answered readily, telling Jennifer about Daisy the horse and the chickens, and how Mr. Brooks let them help with chores. Lily was quieter but nodded along, occasionally adding a word or two. Then Jennifer turned to James. How about you, James? How are you adjusting? It's good here, James said carefully. Mr. Brooks is teaching me about ranching. I go to school. We have enough food. Nobody hurts us? Jennifer's expression flickered at that last statement. Did someone hurt you before? James shook his head quickly. No, Mom never hurt us. But some of her boyfriends were mean. They yelled a lot. Mr. Brooks doesn't yell. Samuel felt his jaw tighten. This was news to him, the existence of mean boyfriends in their past. That must have been scary, Jennifer said softly. Sometimes, James admitted. But Mom always protected us. She said we were her whole world. She sounds like she loved you very much, Jennifer said. Do you feel safe here with Mr. Brooks? James looked directly at Samuel, his blue eyes serious. Yeah, I do. He keeps his promises. He's teaching me stuff. And he's trying really hard, even though he doesn't know much about kids. Jennifer tried to hide her smile. Fair assessment. Can I talk to each of you separately? Just for a few minutes? Samuel's stomach dropped, but he nodded. Jennifer took James first, speaking with him in the spare room for 10 minutes. Then Emma, then Lily. Samuel waited in the kitchen, trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. When Jennifer emerged, her expression was unreadable. Mr. Brooks, can we talk outside? They stepped onto the porch, and Samuel braced himself for the worst. I have to admit, Jennifer began, When I got the report about a single middle-aged rancher taking in 3 unrelated children with no legal documentation, I expected to find a problematic situation. But those kids in there, they're thriving. Samuel exhaled slowly. They're good kids. They are. And you're clearly doing something right. James is particularly articulate about how you're helping him feel secure. Emma won't stop talking about the horses. Even Lily, who's clearly the shyest, smiled when she mentioned the chickens, so they can stay. Samuel asked. Jennifer's expression became more serious. For now. But Mr. Brooks, you need to understand, this situation is irregular. You have no legal standing as their guardian. If something happened to you, if they got sick or injured, you couldn't make medical decisions. You're essentially operating in a legal gray area. I've already contacted legal aid, Samuel said. We're working on filing for guardianship. That's good. I'll need documentation of that process. I'm also going to require monthly check-ins for the next 6 months. And Mr. Brooks, she looked at him seriously. Whoever filed that report is watching. Make sure you don't give them any ammunition. Who filed it? Samuel asked. Jennifer shook her head. I can't tell you that, but I'd suggest being careful about who you trust. After Jennifer left, Samuel sat down heavily on the porch steps. The children came out and sat beside him, sensing his tension. Are we staying? James asked quietly. Yeah, Samuel said. You're staying. The relief on their faces was palpable. Emma and Lily immediately returned to their chatter, but James stayed beside Samuel, thoughtful. Mr. Brooks, why did you tell that lady about Mom's boyfriends? I didn't, Samuel said. You did. During the interview, James looked stricken. Did I say something wrong? Are you mad? No, Samuel said firmly. You told the truth, which is exactly what you should have done. But James, why didn't you tell me about them before? The boy shrugged uncomfortably. I don't like thinking about it. One of them broke our TV once because he was mad at Mom. Another one stole money from her purse. Mom always made them leave eventually, but there was always another one. She said she just wanted someone to help her, but they never did. Samuel felt a surge of anger at these faceless men who'd made life harder for a struggling single mother and her children. Well, you don't have to worry about that here. It's just us. I like just us, James said simply. That afternoon, Samuel called Patricia to update her on the CPS visit. She was relieved that it had gone well, but shared Jennifer's concerns about the legal situation. We need to move faster on this, Patricia said. I'm going to pull some strings, see if I can expedite the process. In the meantime, I need you to start documenting everything. Keep a journal of daily activities, any concerns, any progress the kids make. If this goes to court, we'll need evidence that you're providing adequate care. Samuel started the journal that evening, sitting at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. He wrote about James's progress in school, about Emma's observant nature, about Lily's slowly growing confidence. He wrote about teaching them ranch work, about the routines they'd established, about the small victories and challenges of each day. It felt strange, putting his life into words. He wasn't much for writing, but as he filled page after page, he realized how much had changed in just 3 weeks. These children had transformed his solitary existence into something messy and complicated and surprisingly full. The following week brought a new challenge. Samuel was in the barn when he heard James shouting from the house. He ran back to find James in the bathroom, the twins crying and water everywhere. The sink broke, James said frantically. I was just washing my hands and it fell off the wall. Samuel surveyed the damage. The sink had indeed detached from the wall, water gushing from the exposed pipes. He quickly shut off the water valve and stood there dripping and frustrated, looking at yet another expense he hadn't budgeted for. Is it bad? James asked in a small voice. Samuel looked at the boy's terrified expression and realized James thought he was in trouble. It's not your fault. This house is old. Things break. We'll fix it. But fixing it meant calling a plumber, which meant money he didn't have. Samuel's savings were already depleted from the shopping trip and legal fees. He'd been managing, but barely. That evening, he sat down with his ledger and did the math. Between the children's expenses, the plumber, and the upcoming legal costs, he was going to fall short. He'd have to sell some cattle earlier than planned, which would hurt his profits for the year. He must have looked worried because James appeared at his elbow, peering at the numbers. "Is it because of us?" James asked. "Are we too expensive?" Samuel closed the ledger. "Managing money is part of being an adult. It's not your concern, but it is," James insisted. "If we're making things hard for you—" "You're not making things hard," Samuel interrupted. "You're making things different. And different is okay. We'll figure it out." But as Samuel lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he wondered if he was being foolish. Maybe he was in over his head. Maybe these children deserved someone with more resources, more experience, more to offer than a struggling ranch and a man who barely knew what he was doing. The next morning, Samuel's neighbor, Frank Patterson, stopped by. Frank owned the ranch to the east and had been Samuel's closest neighbor for 15 years. Though they only spoke a few times a year, "Heard you've got some young ones staying with you," Frank said without preamble. Samuel tensed. "That's right." Frank studied him for a moment. "My wife wanted me to invite you all to dinner. Sunday, if you're free. She's been cooking for 30 years and misses having a crowd." Samuel was taken aback. "That's kind of you. She also wanted me to tell you that if you need help with anything, childcare, supplies, whatever, you just ask. We raised 3 kids ourselves. We know it takes a village." After Frank left, Samuel stood on his porch, feeling strangely emotional. He'd been so focused on doing everything himself that he'd forgotten that asking for help wasn't the same as failing. That Sunday, they drove to the Patterson Ranch. Martha Patterson was a warm, bustling woman who immediately swept the children into her kitchen, putting them to work making cookies while she finished dinner, over pot roast and potatoes. Frank and Martha shared stories about their own children, offered advice without being pushy, and treated Samuel's situation as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You're doing a good thing," Martha said as they cleaned up. "Those kids need stability, and you're giving them that." "I'm barely keeping my head above water," Samuel admitted. Martha laughed. "That's just parenting. Nobody knows what they're doing. You just love them and try not to screw up too badly." On the drive home, the twins fell asleep in their car seats, and James looked out the window at the darkening sky. "The Pattersons are nice," he said. "They are," Samuel agreed. "Do you think we'll get to stay long enough to have dinner with them again?" Samuel heard the worry beneath the question, the uncertainty that these children carried with them everywhere, the fear that this stability was temporary. "I'm working on it," Samuel said. "I can't promise how it'll turn out, but I'm fighting for you. All of you. You need to know that," James nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. And as Samuel drove through the Montana night, with 3 sleeping children in his truck, he realized that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about temporary guardianship or legal obligation. These children had become his. Maybe not legally, not yet, but in all the ways that actually mattered. And Samuel Brooks, the man who'd spent 20 years afraid to care about anyone, had finally found something worth fighting for. The complications were mounting: financial pressure, legal uncertainty, whoever had reported them to CPS. But for the first time in decades, Samuel felt truly alive. The walls he'd built were crumbling, and instead of fear, he felt something close to hope. Maybe that was what healing looked like: messy, expensive, terrifying, and absolutely worth it. November melted into December, and with it came Montana's harsh winter. Samuel woke one morning to find 6 inches of snow blanketing the ranch, with more falling steadily from a gray sky. The children pressed their faces against the windows, mesmerized. "Can we go outside?" Emma begged. Samuel looked at their eager faces and realized this might be their first real experience with snow. After breakfast and chores, then we'll see about building a snowman. The morning routine had become smoother over the past month. James handled the chickens without supervision now. The twins helped set the table, and everyone knew their responsibilities. It was still chaotic. Emma talked non-stop through breakfast. Lily spilled her juice at least twice a week, and James worried about everything. But it was their chaos. Samuel had grown used to it, even found himself missing the noise on the rare occasions when the house was quiet. After chores, Samuel bundled the children in their winter gear and led them outside. He showed them how to pack snow for a snowman, how to make snow angels, how to catch snowflakes on their tongues. Their laughter echoed across the empty fields, and Samuel found himself smiling more than he had in years. "Mr. Brooks, look!" Lily called, pointing at tracks in the snow. "What made those?" Samuel knelt beside her, examining the prints. "Deer. Probably came through early this morning looking for food." "Winter's hard on them. Can we help them?" Lily asked, her brown eyes earnest. "We can leave some hay out at the edge of the property," Samuel said. "Won't save them all, but it might help a few." Later, as they scattered hay near the tree line, James asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" "Before we came, I mean." Samuel considered the question. "I thought I liked being alone. Turned out I was just good at it. There's a difference. I don't like being alone," James admitted. "Even when Mom was alive, when she had to work at night, I'd lie awake listening to every sound. I was always scared something bad would happen and nobody would know." "You're not alone anymore," Samuel said. "None of us are." That afternoon, Rebecca called. She'd managed to find a studio apartment in Billings and wanted to visit the following weekend. The children were excited, but Samuel noticed James's anxiety spike afterward. The boy became quiet, withdrawn, spending the evening staring out the window. Samuel found him there after putting the twins to bed. "Want to talk about it?" James shrugged. "What if Rebecca wants to take us back? What if she found a place and now she thinks we should live with her? Would you want that?" Samuel asked carefully. "I don't know," James said miserably. "I love Rebecca. She was Mom's best friend. But I like it here. I like my school. I like helping with the ranch. I don't want to leave." Samuel sat down beside him. "Have you told Rebecca how you feel?" "I don't want to hurt her feelings," James said. "She tried so hard to keep us together. If I tell her I want to stay here instead of with her, she'll think I don't care about her." "That's a heavy burden for a 7-year-old to carry," Samuel observed. "How about this? When Rebecca comes, we all sit down and talk. Honest conversation, no hurt feelings. Figure out what's best for everyone. Sound fair?" James nodded slowly. "Okay." But Samuel lay awake that night, his own worries multiplying. What if Rebecca did want to take the children? He had no legal right to stop her. The guardianship paperwork was still pending, caught up in bureaucratic delays, despite Patricia's best efforts. If Rebecca changed her mind about the arrangement, he'd have to let them go. The realization of how much that would hurt surprised him. Somewhere over the past 6 weeks, these children had stopped being temporary guests and started being family. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. Samuel was fixing a fence line when a luxury SUV pulled up the driveway. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, looking wildly out of place against the ranch backdrop. "Samuel Brooks," the man called. "That's me," Samuel said, setting down his tools. The man extended his hand. "Robert Chen. I'm Margaret Chen's husband. She's the principal at Pine Ridge Elementary." Samuel shook his hand, confused. "Is there a problem with James?" "Just the opposite," Robert said. "Margaret told me about your situation. I'm a family law attorney in Billings. I'd like to offer my services pro bono." Samuel stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Robert smiled. "Because Margaret came home and told me about a rancher fighting to keep 3 kids together when the system wanted to split them apart. She said if more people fought like that, we'd have fewer broken kids in the world. I tend to agree. I already have a lawyer," Samuel said. "Legal aid assigned Patricia Hoffman. Patricia's excellent, but she's overworked with a massive caseload," Robert said. "I have resources she doesn't, time, connections, a full support staff. Let me help expedite this process." Samuel's pride warred with practicality. He wasn't used to accepting charity. But this wasn't about him, it was about the children. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you." Robert pulled out his tablet. "Good. Let's talk about your case." They spent the next hour going over every detail. Robert asked questions Samuel hadn't even thought to consider, about Rebecca's intentions, about the children's father's whereabouts. About whether anyone else might claim parental rights. The father's a ghost, Samuel said. Rebecca said the mother never talked about him. That could complicate things, Robert said. If he's alive and finds out about the children, he could potentially claim custody, even if he's never been involved in their lives. Samuel felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Can we prevent that? We can try, Robert said. First step is documenting the abandonment. If we can prove he has no relationship with the children and hasn't supported them, a judge is unlikely to award him custody. But we need to prepare for all possibilities. After Robert left, Samuel sat on his porch feeling overwhelmed. Every time he thought he had a handle on the situation, new complications emerged. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. No matter how carefully he tried, something always slipped through. James appeared in the doorway. Who was that man? A lawyer. He's going to help make sure you and your sisters can stay here. James's face brightened, then fell. What about Rebecca? Where would she go? Rebecca would still be part of your lives, Samuel assured him. She could visit, call, be involved. She just wouldn't be your primary guardian. Oh, James processed this. Would that hurt her feelings? Samuel realized this child spent far too much time worrying about adults' feelings. James, come here. The boy sat beside him, and Samuel chose his words carefully. You're 7 years old. Your job isn't to protect adults' feelings or to make sure everyone else is happy. Your job is to be a kid, to go to school, to play, to grow up safe. The adults in your life need to figure out what's best for you, not the other way around. But I'm the big brother, James protested. I have to take care of Emma and Lily. Being a big brother means looking out for your sisters, playing with them, teaching them things, Samuel said. It doesn't mean carrying the weight of adult decisions. That's my job now. Let me do it. James looked skeptical. You promise you won't let anyone split us up? I promise I'll fight like hell to prevent it, Samuel said. And can't promise I'll win, but I can promise I'll fight. That seemed to satisfy James. He leaned against Samuel's shoulder, and they sat together watching the sun set over snow-covered fields. The weekend arrived with Rebecca's visit. She pulled up in a borrowed car, looking tired, but happier than the last time Samuel had seen her. The children ran to greet her, and she wrapped them in a long hug, tears streaming down her face. You've all gotten so big, she said, though it had only been 5 weeks. Over coffee, while the children played in their room, Samuel and Rebecca had the conversation he'd been dreading. I found an apartment, Rebecca said. It's small, but there's a pull-out couch and I could probably fit an air mattress for the twins. I've been thinking, maybe after Christmas, they could come back to Billings. Start fresh in the new year. Samuel's chest tightened, but he kept his voice neutral. Have you asked them what they want? Rebecca looked down at her coffee. I'm scared to. What if they don't want to come with me? What if I failed them so badly that they'd rather stay with a stranger than come home? I'm not a stranger anymore, Samuel said gently. And you didn't fail them. You saved them. You could have dumped them with CPS and walked away, but you didn't. You found them a safe place and made sure they stayed together. But I left them, Rebecca whispered. I promised Sarah I'd take care of them, and then I left them with you. You didn't have a choice, Samuel said. You did the best you could with an impossible situation. The children know that. But Rebecca, we need to talk about what's actually best for them, not what makes us feel better about ourselves. Rebecca looked up, startled. They're thriving here, Samuel continued. James loves his school. The twins are coming out of their shells. They have space to run, animals to care for, stability. Could you give them that in a studio apartment in Billings while working 2 jobs? No, Rebecca admitted, her voice breaking. But I feel like I'm abandoning them again. Like I'm taking the easy way out. There's nothing easy about what you're doing, Samuel said. Putting their needs ahead of your feelings? That's the hardest thing there is. But if you really want what's best for them, maybe the answer isn't about who gets to keep them. Maybe it's about working together to give them the most stable life possible. They talked for another hour, hashing out a plan. Rebecca would remain involved. Regular visits, phone calls, maintaining her relationship with the children. But she would support Samuel's petition for guardianship, acknowledging that the ranch offered advantages she couldn't provide. "I still want to be Aunt Rebecca to them," she said. "I still want to matter." "You'll always matter," Samuel assured her. "You're the connection to their mother. That's irreplaceable." When they told the children, the reactions were mixed. Emma and Lily seemed content either way, adaptable in the way young children often are. But James's relief was palpable. "So we get to stay?" he asked, looking between Samuel and Rebecca. "Really stay?" "If the court approves it, yes," Samuel said. James turned to Rebecca. "Are you mad at us?" Rebecca pulled him into a hug. "Never. I could never be mad at you. I just want you to be happy and safe. And if that's here with Mr. Brooks, then that's what I want too." That evening, after Rebecca left and the children were in bed, Samuel updated his journal. He wrote about Rebecca's visit, about the progress the children were making, about James's anxiety and how it was slowly easing. He also wrote about himself, about how teaching the children was teaching him, about how their healing was somehow healing him too. 20 years of grief and isolation were starting to lift, like fog burning off in morning sun. The next morning, Samuel took the children to church, something he hadn't done since Marie died. He wasn't particularly religious, but small-town Montana meant church was where community happened. If he was going to raise these children here, they needed to be part of that community. The congregation's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Elderly women cooed over the twins. Men Samuel barely knew offered to help with repairs he'd mentioned needing. Margaret Chen introduced James to other kids his age, and suddenly his son had playdate invitations. His son. The phrase had slipped into Samuel's thoughts without permission, but it felt right. After the service, Pastor Williams pulled Samuel aside. "I heard about what you're doing. The whole town has. It stirred something up in people, reminded them what community means." "I'm just trying to give 3 kids a stable home," Samuel said, uncomfortable with the attention. "You're doing more than that," the pastor said. "You're showing everyone that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." On the drive home, Emma fell asleep against Lily, and James stared out the window with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Brooks," he said finally, "at church, some people called you our dad. Should I correct them?" Samuel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you want to call me?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I loved my mom. I don't want to forget her." "You won't," Samuel said. "Nobody's asking you to. Your mom will always be your mom. Nothing changes that." "But she's not here anymore," James said, his voice small. "And you are. You make us breakfast and help with homework and teach us stuff. That's what dads do, right?" Samuel had to clear his throat before answering. "Yeah, that's what dads do." "So would it be okay if I called you Dad? Just to make it less confusing for other people." Samuel pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to look at James. The boy's eyes were bright with unshed tears, his expression hopeful and terrified. "It would be more than okay," Samuel said, his own voice rough with emotion. "It would be an honor." James smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Okay, thanks, Dad." The word hit Samuel like a physical force. Dad. He was somebody's dad. 3 somebody's dad, if the twins followed James's lead. As he drove the rest of the way home, Samuel felt something slot into place in his chest. A piece of himself he didn't know was missing until these children showed up at his door. He'd spent 20 years convinced he was better off alone. But these 3 children, with their trauma and resilience and capacity for love, despite everything they'd lost, had proven him wrong. Samuel Brooks had finally found his way home. And home, it turned out, wasn't a place. It was 3 children who needed him as much as he needed them. The legal battles weren't over. The financial struggles remained. The uncertainty about their future still loomed. But for the first time in decades, Samuel wasn't facing it alone, and that made all the difference. February arrived with bitter cold and clear skies. Samuel marked the date on his calendar with a heavy hand. February 14th, the guardianship hearing. Valentine's Day. Either the universe had a sense of irony, or it was offering him the greatest gift he could ask for. Robert Chen had been relentless over the past 3 months. Every piece of documentation was perfect, every witness statement carefully prepared. He'd even managed to locate the children's biological father, or rather, proof that he'd signed termination of parental rights papers 6 years ago in exchange for not paying child support. The man wanted nothing to do with his children then, and apparently nothing had changed. One less obstacle, Robert had said when he'd shared the news. But Samuel knew there were still plenty of obstacles remaining. The biggest one being that he was a 53-year-old bachelor rancher with no parenting experience, trying to convince a judge he should raise 3 traumatized children. The night before the hearing, Samuel found himself pacing the living room at midnight, too anxious to sleep. The house creaked around him, familiar sounds that usually comforted him, but tonight only amplified his restlessness. "Can't sleep." Samuel turned to find James standing in the hallway, backlit by the nightlight they'd installed after Lily admitted she was afraid of the dark. "You should be asleep," Samuel said, though he made no move to send the boy back to bed. James padded across the room and climbed onto the couch, pulling a blanket around his shoulders. "I keep thinking about tomorrow. What if the judge doesn't like us? The judge isn't deciding whether she likes you," Samuel said, sitting down beside him. "She's deciding what's best for you. What if she thinks what's best is splitting us up?" James's voice cracked on the last word. "Foster families who can give us more stuff, better rooms, newer clothes. James, stop!" Samuel put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me. That judge is going to talk to you tomorrow. She's going to ask you questions, and I need you to tell her the truth about what you want, not what you think adults want to hear. Can you do that?" James nodded slowly. What if the truth isn't enough? Samuel had wondered the same thing 1,000 times. What if love and commitment weren't enough to outweigh his lack of experience and limited resources? What if the court decided these children deserved more than he could give them? "Then we'll deal with it," Samuel said. "But I'm not giving up without a fight. And I need you to fight too. Fight to stay with your sisters. Fight for this family we've built. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," James said, his voice stronger now. "Good." Samuel pulled the boy closer. "Now try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After James returned to bed, Samuel stood at the window watching snow begin to fall. 4 months ago, he'd been a man content with his solitude, or so he'd told himself. Now, the thought of losing these children felt like losing a limb, something vital and irreplaceable. He'd been so careful after Marie died, so determined never to hurt like that again. But these 3 kids had bypassed every defense he'd built, had reminded him that a life without risk was just another form of death. The alarm went off at 5:30, though Samuel had been awake since 4. He made breakfast mechanically, pancakes, because James had once mentioned they were his mother's specialty on special occasions. The children ate quietly, sensing the tension in the air. Samuel dressed them in their best clothes, the outfits Martha Patterson had helped him pick out specifically for court. James in khaki pants and a button-down shirt that made him look older than 8. The twins in matching dresses, though Emma's was purple and Lily's was pink, because, as Emma had firmly stated months ago, "We're not the same person." The drive to Billings took 90 minutes. Samuel gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, while Rebecca, who'd driven up the night before, kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter from the passenger seat, trying to distract the children from their anxiety. The Yellowstone County Courthouse loomed ahead, all stone and authority. Samuel's stomach churned as he parked and helped the children out of the truck. Remember, he told them as they walked toward the entrance, tell the truth. That's all you have to do. Inside, Samuel was overwhelmed by the crowd waiting for them. Robert Chen, of course, looking professional in his suit, but also Martha and Frank Patterson, Principal Margaret Chen, Pastor Williams, Mrs. Morrison from the general store, and even Dorothy Pierce from the library. Jennifer Martinez from CPS stood off to the side, her expression carefully neutral but not unkind. "Good Lord," Samuel muttered. Martha heard him and smiled. "You didn't think we'd let you do this alone, did you? These kids matter to Pine Ridge. We're here to make sure that Judge knows it." The bailiff called them into the courtroom, and Samuel's heart began racing. The room was smaller than he'd expected, more intimate, which somehow made it more intimidating. Judge Catherine Morrison sat behind the bench, a woman in her mid-60s with grey hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. Robert stood and began his presentation, outlining the case with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. He spoke about the children's history, their mother's death, Rebecca's desperate search for a solution, and Samuel's decision to take them in. "Your Honor," Robert said, "I won't pretend this is a conventional case. Mr. Brooks had no prior relationship with these children. He has no training in child development, no experience as a parent. On paper, there are probably dozens of foster families who would seem like better options." Samuel felt his heart sink. Where was Robert going with this? "But this case isn't about what looks good on paper," Robert continued. "It's about 3 children who have already lost everything: their mother, their home, their security. These children don't need perfect parents. They need committed parents. They need someone who will fight for them, who will keep them together, who will give them the stability they've never had." Robert pulled out a folder and began presenting evidence, report cards showing James's academic improvement, medical records documenting weight gain and overall health improvements in all 3 children, photographs of the ranch and the children's rooms, testimonials from teachers and neighbors. The state's own caseworker, Jennifer Martinez, has conducted monthly home visits, Robert said. "Ms. Martinez, would you share your assessment?" Jennifer stood and Samuel held his breath. "Your Honor, when I first received the report about Mr. Brooks, I expected to find an inadequate situation," Jennifer began. "Instead, I found 3 children who are thriving. James has gone from a struggling, anxious 2nd grader to a confident 3rd grader reading above grade level. Emma and Lily, who were shy and withdrawn, are now engaging actively with their pre-K class. All 3 children have gained healthy weight, show no signs of abuse or neglect, and most importantly, demonstrate strong attachment to Mr. Brooks." She paused, then added, "In 15 years of child welfare work, I've rarely seen children adjust so well to a placement. Whatever Mr. Brooks is doing, it's working." Judge Morrison made notes, her expression unreadable. Then she called the witnesses. Martha Patterson testified about watching Samuel transform from a lonely recluse to an engaged father. Principal Chen spoke about James's progress and his positive influence on other students. Pastor Williams talked about seeing the family at church, about how the children had brought Samuel back into the community after 20 years of isolation. Then Rebecca took the stand. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, "you were the children's mother's best friend. You brought them to Mr. Brooks. Do you believe this placement is in their best interest?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Your Honor, when Sarah, their mother, was dying, she made me promise 2 things. First, that I'd keep her children together. Second, that I'd make sure they had a stable, loving home. I tried to provide that myself, but I couldn't. I was 23, working 2 jobs, getting evicted. I was failing them." She took a deep breath. "Bringing them to Mr. Brooks was the hardest thing I've ever done. It felt like giving up. But it wasn't giving up. It was giving them what they needed. Mr. Brooks has given those kids something I couldn't: security, consistency, and unconditional love. He's kept both promises I made to Sarah. I support his guardianship completely." Finally, Judge Morrison called Samuel to the stand. His legs felt like rubber as he approached, and his hands shook as he was sworn in. "Mr. Brooks," the judge began, "you're 53 years old, you've never been a parent, and you make a modest living from your ranch. Why should I give you custody of 3 young children?" Samuel took a deep breath. "Your Honor, you're right that I don't have experience, but I have commitment. I have a stable home, and I have love for those 3 kids that surprised the hell out of me. Excuse my language." A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly. 4 months ago, I was living alone, barely talking to anyone, just existing, Samuel continued. Then Rebecca knocked on my door with 3 scared, hungry kids, and I had a choice: turn them away or help them. I helped them, and somewhere along the way, they stopped being a responsibility and started being my family. "What happens if I grant guardianship and it doesn't work out?" the judge asked. "What if you decide it's too hard, too expensive, too much trouble?" Samuel met her eyes directly. "That's not going to happen, Your Honor. Those kids have lost too much already. I'm not adding to that list. I'm in this for the long haul, whatever it takes." Judge Morrison made more notes, then said, "I'd like to speak with the children now, separately, in my chambers." Samuel's stomach dropped as a bailiff led James away first. 10 minutes later, James emerged looking pale but composed. Then Emma, who came out chattering about the judge's pretty necklace. Finally Lily, who was crying softly, though the judge's clerk assured everyone they were happy tears. The judge called for a 30-minute recess. Samuel stood in the hallway, unable to sit, unable to eat the sandwich Martha tried to give him, unable to do anything but wait and pray. Robert appeared at his side. "You did well in there. Did I do enough?" Samuel asked. "We're about to find out." The 30 minutes stretched into 45, then an hour. Finally, the bailiff called them back in. Samuel took his seat, the children flanking him on one side, Rebecca on the other. He reached down and took James's hand, feeling the boy's fingers tremble. Judge Morrison entered and took her seat. Samuel couldn't read her expression at all. "I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented today," she began. "I've spoken extensively with each child. I've read the reports from Ms. Martinez, and I've given careful consideration to what arrangement best serves these children's welfare." Samuel's heart pounded so hard, he thought everyone in the courtroom must be able to hear it. "This is an unusual case," the judge continued. "Mr. Brooks is not the conventional choice for guardian. He lacks parenting experience, his financial resources are limited, and he had no prior relationship with these children." Samuel felt James's grip tighten on his hand. "However," Judge Morrison said, and Samuel's breath caught, "the law requires me to consider the best interests of the children, not what's most conventional. And the evidence is overwhelming that these children are thriving in Mr. Brooks's care." She looked directly at Samuel. "Mr. Brooks, I spoke with each of these children. James told me you taught him that keeping promises matters more than being perfect. Emma told me you let her be herself, even when she talks too much. And Lily told me that for the first time in her life, she's not afraid to go to sleep at night because she knows you'll be there in the morning." The judge's expression softened slightly. "Those children don't need a perfect parent. They need you. Therefore, I'm granting your petition for legal guardianship of James, Emma, and Lily Carter, effective immediately." The gavel came down. For a moment, Samuel couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he'd just heard. Then James launched himself into Samuel's arms, and the twins followed. And suddenly he was on his knees on the courtroom floor with all 3 children wrapped around him, crying and laughing and holding on like they'd never let go. "We get to stay?" Emma kept asking. "We really get to stay?" "Forever," Samuel managed to say through his own tears. "You get to stay forever." Behind them, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Martha was crying, Frank was grinning, and Rebecca was hugging everyone in reach. Robert shook hands with people, accepting congratulations, but Samuel barely noticed. He only had eyes for the 3 children in his arms, his children now, legally and officially. James pulled back to look at Samuel's face. "You're really our dad now?" "I'm really your dad now," Samuel confirmed. Good, James said, then buried his face in Samuel's shoulder and cried, deep, gulping sobs that had probably been building for months. Samuel held him, held all of them, and let them cry out their relief and joy and the weight of all the fear they'd been carrying. Eventually, the formalities had to be completed. Papers were signed, copies made, instructions given about the one-year review that would make the guardianship permanent. But Samuel barely heard any of it. His focus remained on the 3 children who stayed close to him, as if afraid that if they let him out of their sight, the dream would end. Outside the courthouse, the February sun was shining, despite the cold. The group gathered on the steps for photographs. Robert insisted, saying Samuel would want documentation of this day. Samuel stood with his arms around his children, unable to stop smiling, despite the tears still wet on his cheeks. Martha and Frank had arranged a celebration lunch at a restaurant in Billings, and the whole group descended on the place like a small army. Samuel sat at the head of the table with his children beside him, watching as his community, because that's what they were now, celebrated this new family. Rebecca sat across from him, her eyes still red but her smile genuine. "Thank you," she mouthed. Samuel nodded. They'd both kept their promises to Sarah. The children were together, safe and loved. What more could anyone ask? The drive back to Pine Ridge late that afternoon was quieter than the morning drive had been, but it was a peaceful quiet. The twins had fallen asleep in their car seats, and James sat between them, looking out the window at the familiar landscape with a small smile on his face. "Dad?" he said softly, trying out the word now that it was official. "Yeah, son? I'm glad Rebecca knocked on your door that night." Samuel glanced in the rearview mirror at the sleeping twins, then over at James. "Me too, James, me too." As they pulled onto the ranch road, Samuel saw the house waiting for them. Lights on, smoke rising from the chimney. Home. Not just his home anymore, but theirs. A home built not on biology or obligation, but on choice and courage and love. Samuel Brooks had spent 20 years building walls around his heart. Then 3 children and a desperate young woman had knocked on his door, and those walls had crumbled. In their place, something better had grown, something worth fighting for. Worth changing for, worth living for, a family, his family. And as he parked the truck and helped his children out into the cold February evening, Samuel knew with absolute certainty that these 3 kids who'd arrived on his doorstep with nothing and given him everything, was exactly what he'd been waiting for all along. He just hadn't known it until they knocked. The Montana spring of 2025 arrived with a violence that surprised even long-time residents. After the harshest winter in decades, the thaw came suddenly, snow melting in rushing streams, mud everywhere, and wildflowers exploding across the fields like someone had spilled paint across the landscape. Samuel stood in the barn doorway, watching his children. And they were his children now. Legally and in every way that mattered, chasing each other through the muddy yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. Emma's purple jacket was covered in mud. Lily had lost one of her boots somewhere, and James was trying unsuccessfully to herd his sisters toward the house like they were stray cattle. "They're going to track that mud everywhere," Martha Patterson observed from beside him. She'd stopped by to drop off some hand-me-down clothes from her grandchildren, though Samuel suspected she really just wanted to check on them. She did that a lot. Yeah, Samuel agreed, but he was smiling. A year ago, the thought of mud tracked through his house would have irritated him. Now it was just part of life with kids. "You've changed, Samuel Brooks," Martha said, not for the first time. "Had to," Samuel replied. They changed everything, it was true. The 1-year anniversary of that February court hearing had come and gone 3 weeks ago, marked by a quick review hearing that had taken all of 15 minutes. Judge Morrison had glanced at the reports, noted the children's continued progress, and declared the guardianship permanent with a smile that suggested she'd never had any doubt. "Mr. Brooks," she'd said as they were leaving, "in 30 years on the bench, this is one of the cases I'm most proud to have presided over. Those children are lucky to have you." Samuel had wanted to tell her she had it backward, that he was the lucky one, but his throat had been too tight to speak. Now, watching James finally corral the twins and march them toward the porch, Samuel reflected on how much had changed in the past year. The house that had once been silent now rang with constant noise. Arguments over whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Emma's endless questions about everything. Lily's off-key singing while she helped with dishes. The refrigerator was covered in artwork and spelling tests, and a calendar so full of activities that Samuel sometimes felt dizzy looking at it. His bank account was smaller. His truck needed new tires because he was driving to town 3 times a week for school and activities instead of once every 2 weeks. His grocery bill had tripled. His quiet mornings were gone, replaced by chaos and spilled milk, and someone always needing something, and he wouldn't trade any of it for the world. "Dad," James called from the porch. "Emma stepped on a nail. Well, not through her boot, but she stepped on one, and now she's crying because she thinks she needs a shot." Samuel sighed and headed toward the house. This was the 4th emergency of the morning. Life with 3 kids meant constant small crises. But he'd learned to distinguish between real problems and drama. Emma was indeed crying on the porch, holding her foot while Lily patted her shoulder sympathetically. Samuel examined the boot. The nail hadn't gone through, hadn't even made a dent in the thick rubber sole. "You're fine," he told Emma. "The boot protected you. That's why we wear them. But what if I get tetanus?" Emma asked, her tears stopping as quickly as they'd started. The girl had recently discovered the concept of diseases and now worried about catching everyone she'd ever heard of. "You got your tetanus shot last month," Samuel reminded her. "Remember, at the doctor's office. You were very brave." "Oh yeah," Emma said, brightening. "I got a sticker." "You did. Now go clean that mud off before you come inside. All of you." As the children trooped off to the hose, Martha chuckled. "You handle them well." "Natural, Father?" Samuel snorted. "There's nothing natural about it. I'm making it up as I go. That's what all parents do," Martha said. "The ones who admit it, anyway." Later that afternoon, after the children were clean and fed, and the twins were down for a nap, because yes, 4-year-olds still needed naps, something Samuel had learned the hard way, James appeared in the barn, where Samuel was repairing a stall door. "Can I help?" the boy asked. Samuel handed him a hammer. "Hold this nail steady while I—" "No, steadier. There you go." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before James spoke again. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever miss how it was before? When it was just you and it was quiet?" Samuel set down his tools and looked at his son. James was 8 now, taller and stronger than he'd been that first night. He'd filled out, lost the gaunt look of a child who'd gone hungry too many times. But sometimes, like now, Samuel could still see the scared, worried boy who'd shown up on his doorstep. "Honestly," Samuel said, "no, I thought I liked the quiet, but I was just hiding. The quiet wasn't peace, it was emptiness. You 3 filled that emptiness, made this place feel alive again." James nodded slowly. "Some kids at school asked if you were my real dad. I said yes. Was that okay?" Samuel felt his chest tighten. That was more than okay. I am your real dad. Maybe not the one who gave you your DNA, but the one who's here every day." "That's what counts." "That's what I told them," James said. "I said you're realer than my birth dad ever was, because you actually wanted us." Samuel pulled the boy into a hug, wondering how an 8-year-old could be so wise and so wounded at the same time. "I do want you, all 3 of you. Best decision I ever made." That evening, Rebecca called, her weekly check-in that had become as regular as church on Sundays. She'd gotten a promotion at her job in Billings, had moved into a larger apartment, and was dating someone who Samuel had met twice and tentatively approved of. "How are my favorite kids?" she asked when Samuel put her on speaker. The children crowded around the phone, all trying to talk at once. Emma told her about the nail incident, greatly exaggerated. Lily shared that she'd learned to write her name, and James reported that he'd gotten an A on his science project about ranch animals. "I'm so proud of you all," Rebecca said, and Samuel could hear the emotion in her voice. "I'll be up to visit next weekend. Maybe we can have that picnic we talked about?" After the call ended and the children scattered to their evening activities, Samuel stood in his kitchen, his busy, messy, lived-in kitchen, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked him over. A year ago, he'd stood in a courtroom terrified of losing these children. Now he stood in his kitchen making dinner for 4, helping with homework at the table, mediating arguments about bedtime, and living a life he'd never imagined wanting. The doorbell rang, which was unusual. Most people who visited just walked in after knocking. Samuel opened the door to find Robert Chen standing on his porch, looking official in a suit despite the late hour. "Robert? What's wrong?" Samuel's mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Had something happened with the guardianship? Was there a problem he didn't know about? "Nothing's wrong," Robert said quickly, reading Samuel's expression. "I actually came by with good news." "Can I come in?" Samuel stepped back, letting the lawyer enter. James appeared immediately, protective instincts kicking in at the sight of the official-looking visitor. "It's okay," Samuel told him. "This is Mr. Chen, remember? A lawyer." James relaxed slightly but didn't leave. Samuel appreciated the kid's loyalty even as he recognized the anxiety that drove it, the fear that good things could be snatched away without warning. Robert pulled out some papers. "I wanted to deliver these in person. The final adoption paperwork came through. If you want to proceed, we can begin the formal adoption process. It would change their last name to Brooks and make the guardianship truly permanent. No more annual reviews, no more court supervision." Samuel stared at the papers, his heart pounding. Adoption. He hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Had been so focused on just keeping them that he hadn't considered making it even more permanent. "What do you think?" Robert asked. "I know it's a big step. What's adoption?" James asked, and Samuel realized the boy had been listening to everything. Samuel knelt down to James's level. "Adoption would mean you'd legally become my son, not just my ward. Your last name would change to Brooks. Emma and Lily too. It would mean nobody could ever question whether you belong here. You'd be mine permanently." James's eyes widened. "Forever, forever. Not just court says so forever?" "Forever, forever," Samuel confirmed. "Can we do it?" James asked eagerly. "Can Emma and Lily and me be Brooks? For real?" Samuel looked up at Robert, who was smiling. "I think that's your answer," the lawyer said. "Yeah," Samuel said, his voice rough. "Yeah, let's do it." After Robert left with signed papers and promises to start the process immediately, Samuel gathered all 3 children in the living room. The twins were confused about what adoption meant, so James, ever the teacher, explained it to them in terms they could understand. "It means we get to be a real family," he told his sisters. "With the same last name and everything? Like we're really Dad's kids?" Emma asked. "We already are his kids," Lily said matter-of-factly. She'd always been the most accepting of their new life, the quickest to adapt. But now everyone will know it. That night, Samuel updated his journal, a habit he'd maintained religiously since that first week. He wrote about the adoption paperwork, about the mundane miracle of another ordinary day with his children, about how the impossible had become possible. He wrote about James's question, whether he missed the quiet, and his honest answer. He wrote about Emma's dramatic nail incident and Lily's quiet pride in writing her name. He wrote about Rebecca's weekly call and the community that had wrapped around them like a warm blanket. But mostly, he wrote about gratitude. For a desperate young woman's knock on his door. For 3 children brave enough to trust him. For a judge who'd seen past convention to what really mattered. For a community that had made them part of the fabric of small-town life. 3 months later, on a warm August morning, they stood again in Judge Morrison's courtroom. But this time wasn't about guardianship reviews or legal technicalities. This time was about transformation. About 3 children who'd lost everything finding a father, and a lonely man finding his purpose. James Michael Brooks, Judge Morrison read from the documents. Emma Sarah Brooks. Lily Marie Brooks. These are your names now. Your official legal names. The children stood beside Samuel, dressed in their best clothes again, but this time there was no fear in their eyes. Only joy. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, "a year ago I granted you guardianship with some reservations. Not because I doubted your commitment, but because this was uncharted territory. Now standing here approving this adoption, I have no reservations whatsoever. You've proven that family isn't about biology or circumstances. It's about showing up every single day and choosing love." She smiled, something Samuel had rarely seen her do in court. "Congratulations. You're officially a family." This time when the gavel came down, Samuel didn't cry. He just pulled his 3 children, his son and daughters, bearing his name now, close, and felt complete in a way he hadn't felt since Marie died 25 years ago. The celebration afterward was bigger than the guardianship party had been. The whole town seemed to show up at the Patterson Ranch. Neighbors Samuel barely knew, teachers and school staff, even the clerk from the hardware store. Someone had made a banner that read, "Congratulations, Brooks family," and the children posed under it for what felt like 100 photographs. Speech. Someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Samuel had never been good at public speaking, but looking at the faces of people who'd supported them, who'd made this possible, he felt like he owed them something. "A year and a half ago," he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd, "I was a lonely man who'd convinced himself he was content. Then Rebecca Carter knocked on my door with 3 scared children, and everything changed." He looked at Rebecca, who was crying happy tears while her boyfriend held her hand. "Rebecca, you saved these kids. You could have taken the easy way out, but you fought to keep them together. Thank you for trusting me with them." Then he turned to the children. "James, Emma, Lily, you 3 taught me that it's never too late to start over. That love doesn't require perfection, just commitment. That family's built, not born. You gave me a reason to live instead of just existing. I'm the one who should be thanking you." The applause was thunderous, and Samuel felt his face flush with embarrassment. But he also felt pride in his children, in himself, in what they'd built together. As the party continued, Samuel found himself standing with Frank Patterson, watching the children play with a group of local kids. "You did good, Brooks," Frank said. "Real good. I got lucky," Samuel replied. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Frank said. "You made a choice, a hard, scary choice, and you followed through. That's not luck. That's character." The drive home that evening was full of chatter. The children were exhausted, but wired from all the excitement and sugar. They talked over each other, reliving the best parts of the day, already making plans for what they'd do tomorrow. When they pulled up to the house, their house, the Brooks house, the sun was setting in brilliant oranges and reds across the Montana sky. Samuel helped the children out of the truck and stood for a moment, taking it all in. "Dad?" Emma tugged on his hand. "Can we stay up late tonight? Since it's a special day." Samuel looked down at her hopeful face, then at Lily and James standing beside her, their expressions equally pleading. "Half an hour past bedtime," he said. But that's it. Their cheers made him smile. They ran into the house, already arguing about what movie they'd watch during their extra time, and Samuel followed them inside. The house that had once been his sanctuary from the world was now filled with the noise and chaos of family life. The walls that had witnessed 20 years of solitude now echoed, with laughter and arguments and the everyday sounds of children growing up as Samuel tucked them into bed that night, half an hour later than promised because he'd lost track of time. During the movie, each child hugged him tight. "Good night, Dad," James said. "Night, Daddy," the twins chorused, still sometimes using the more childish term, "Good night, my Brooks kids," Samuel said, turning off the light. Later, standing on his porch under the stars, Samuel thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first desperate knock on the door to standing in a courtroom receiving adoption papers. From 3 nameless children and a lonely rancher to the Brooks family, it hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, financial struggles, legal battles, and countless small crises. There had been nights when Samuel wondered if he was doing it right, mornings when he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. But there had also been joy, so much joy. First days of school and lost teeth and report cards and bedtime stories, learning to ride bikes and helping with homework and teaching them about the ranch. watching them heal, watching them grow, watching them become the children they were always meant to be. Samuel Brooks had spent 20 years building walls around his heart, convinced that isolation was safety. Then 3 children and a desperate young woman had proven him wrong. They'd shown him that the only real safety came from connection, from love, from the messy, complicated, beautiful work of building a family. He'd thought he was rescuing them, but the truth was they'd rescued him right back, and now, standing on his porch looking out at the ranch that was finally truly a home, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. Complete. The lonely rancher was lonely no more. The 3 children with no name now bore his name proudly, and together they'd built something stronger than biology, more permanent than paperwork. They'd built a family, the Brooks family, and it all started with one knock on a door and one man brave enough to answer. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.